What happens biologically, at least to me, at this time of the hour, after a lovely lunch, is your eyelids close. Have you experienced that? What I'll try and do is not put you in that kind of a situation and help you with it. As also Sean mentioned today morning, I would not try and be the newspaper, which counts to 15. So there's an old saying that if you can't convince, then confuse people. I'll also try and not do that. More than pulse and paper. There's been amazing speeches today, and also yesterday we've had some very good sessions in the afternoon, late afternoon, all about how we can improve people condition or how we can empower them, like you mentioned, what is missing. And when I look at people in general, I would like to involve you a little bit because that helps with the syndrome where your eyelids don't close. Is that okay? So I can involve people as well at the same time. We've heard this statement before, to err is human. And I think in some context or form, you all have used it, or we hear it all the time. Let me start by showing you three simple photographs. Okay, there are three people. Assume them as three people. Can you see them? Yeah? Okay. Who would you hire in your organization if you meet these three individuals? Raise of hands, who would you hire? The one in the middle, or the one in the left, to your left, or the one to your right? How many say the one in the middle? Okay, that's good. That's a good exercise, by the way. It helps. Okay, so I would like to call them Mr. Careless, Mr. Carefree, and Mr. Careful. So these three people are with us all the time, every time. To go a little further, we believe that the first error to human, or the human error, happens at the recruitment process. I think this comes from various discussions that we've had with various companies, various people in the recruitment business, not just on the shipping, but even otherwise. So this is what we believe in, and this is an idea that I would like to share with you, like everyone else has shared their ideas today. So we believe that the first human error often happens at the time of recruitment. And why is that so? Again, we believe that when you look at people, you look at their pulse and say, is it beating? Is it between 60 and 100? Okay, that's fine. And then we need one more thing. Paper. Do they have a valid certification from some recognized organization? Fair enough. Okay, on you go. I'm not saying this is a general trend, but this is still a trend that we hear and we see. So pulse and paper. And then we asked companies various questions, and one of the I would like to just point out three specific questions. And we asked companies, how many of you use recruitment tools, especially focusing on ratings and junior-most officers? There's a lot of focus on senior officers, and many companies also have a lot of focus on all their employees. But how many really have a specific program for ratings? Because they're still part of the crew, they're part of the safe manning crew as well. They contribute to everything that goes on board the ship. And what about junior officers? And then we asked the second question, from your incident statistics, there's a lot of statistics that we draw. How many can tell us these are specifically from ratings, these are specifically from junior-most officers? Maybe there is, but when I speak to companies or when our consultants speak to companies, when I've tried to look for reports, I probably have not come across those. Maybe they're all lying there, which I've not seen them, but I failed to see these as well. And then finally, we ask, how much of focus or consideration do you give when you actually hire them? Is it just pulse and paper? Is that all they mean for you? So these are some questions that we framed. And then we went on to the whole process of hiring, which I like to call hire. That means you go through a process where you hire people. Once they're hired, they go on board your assets, the ships or the offices, wherever they are, and then you reach a state of dire straits. That means something went wrong, something they did was not correct by your procedures. And then you may end up in a position to fire them. By the way, the word fire and sack, have you heard of the word before? You sack somebody and fire someone? They're two distinct words. It came from the UK coal mining industry. Many years ago, you had tools to work with, right? So you sack someone if they did not a grave danger to the people around them, you take a big sack, put all their tools, and then you ask them to leave. But if they did something very, very bad, you take their tools and put them into the fire. So that's how the word fire and hire came. Oh, sorry, fire and sack came. But why I mention fire is this happens even today. You have to get people to move on because they are not in compliance to your company's values. We believe people are the bedrock of any industry. Somebody mentioned that earlier, that if you want to look at all the not so good things going on, you look at the crew, but crew is also giving you all the positive things that happen in the industry today. 95% of the shipping moves through people out at sea. But we also believe that the wrong people are potential punch-throughs in the sense they are an impact to any organization. We also heard today that human factor plays a major role, if not in all, in most accidents and incidents, even today. And then the wrong person, like we saw earlier, Mr. Careless or Mr. Carefree, is always a problem to your company. Again, why? Because there can be financial costs. If you're looking at it purely from a financial perspective, these numbers that you see are very average numbers. It can be lower, it can be higher, depending on what kind of case you're dealing with. You may have productivity costs. I don't know how many of you have worked with productivity costs, but there is a huge impact for companies when they lose productivity in your organization. Reputation. It's a little difficult to measure, at least in my perspective, but I don't know. It's also an impact for companies. We've had many cases recently that have shown a lot of reputation because of someone who did something incorrectly, you could say. And then commercial costs, off-hires, delays in operations. And then finally, there is one of the things which I feel very personal to me is human capital cost. You hire people with a lot of experience, you train them, and when you lose them, you lose both. Then you redo the whole process again. Potentially, you get to that stage. So this is what we have been listening to different industry stakeholders, and then we said, okay, so what can we do? And then we said, what if? What if you can filter all those 3 C's that you saw, Mr. Careful, Mr. Carefree, and Mr. Careless, and if not all the time or every time, most of the time you get to meet Mr. Careful. What if? But that was a big task. I mean, when we thought about this a few years ago, we said, how do we get to that stage? So the team where I work together with a group of consultants at SeaHealth, that's the team. It's a mixed group. We talked about how can we recruit Mr. Careful? Is that ever possible? But to even conceptualize that, we need to understand what do we want to look for. Now comes the questions part again, so I hope you're still awake. How many of you ride a bicycle? How many of you wear a helmet? Okay, the number of hands that I saw up were a little less now. Okay, fair enough. Second question. How many of you took a flight to Athens? Okay, not so many. Fair enough. Do you all normally take flights when you travel? Okay, good. When the plane landed, right, before the pilot said or took off the seatbelt sign from the overhead, how many of us has unbuckled the seatbelt sign? It's okay, we're in the closed doors. I won't tell anyone. Okay. Now, but I asked this question to a lot of people I meet because it always intrigued me that we tell people how to wear a hard hat or when to wear a hard hat. I live in Copenhagen. When I look at all the people who don't wear hard hats on a fast bike lane, and trust me, you can get hit on a bike lane in Copenhagen, which is more dangerous than being hit on a car. And I asked a couple of them, especially some of my friends, why don't you wear a hard hat? Well, it's not a hard hat, but a bike helmet. And they said, yeah, but it doesn't look cool. Okay, fine. But do you know what can happen if something goes wrong? You can actually be hit by a cycle and fall down, and maybe you can die, but maybe you can just get a scratch on your head. But we're very good at telling what we want to others. Wear a helmet, seat belt, wear your belts and fasten it. But then I asked the question, maybe They don't know. They don't have the knowledge of what can go wrong in case of not wearing a helmet. Maybe they have a personality problem. You know, they're like risk takers. I'm the big Sinbad of the 7 seas. I can do it all. Or, like I say, they don't have light in the head. I'll come to that part. What's the light in the head part? So it could be 3 things is what we kind of figured out by asking these random questions to different people. And then the concepts came, okay, maybe we can help them by giving some knowledge. By knowledge, what we mean is giving the individual to identify the likelihood of appropriate or inappropriate safety behavior in your company. So at the recruitment process, you may want to know whether they have some kind of a knowledge. Why does wearing a helmet help? Why does fastening a seatbelt, or why does doing safe operations help? Maybe they have a different perception of safety. Somebody mentioned, I think Eric mentioned that as well. What is your perception of safety to my perception of safety? Where I come from, we cross the road whether there's a red man or a green man on the lamppost. It doesn't matter, because our perception of safety is different. But to impart knowledge on your company value could be something that is useful. That's number 1. And then we said there has to be some level of personality in an individual. Because when you look at personality traits, and which is very important and specific to safety, do we measure that? Do we know whether that individual is a risk taker, for example? Are they confident enough to tell you that that's wrong or that's right? So there's an angle of personality that we also believe is useful to understand. And then finally, the light in the head, or reasoning. The 2 key elements in reasoning, or logical abilities as we call it, one is the ability to think clearly. And I remember one of the speakers, I can't remember who, mentioned that it's not just about think and acting clearly now, but when you have a similar situation later, you need to reproduce that. That's also equally important. And I think, like you mentioned, Mark, that we tend to forget from our past and then redo the same thing. So I wonder whether our light is actually working all the time, or is it only sometimes? So, yeah, almost done. In knowledge, there are 6 dimensions that we focus on, which is very particular to safety, which is intervention, ownership, carefulness, risk awareness, clarification, and reporting. I wouldn't go into the details of this, but we chose to focus on these key elements because when we looked at various reports and statistics, these were some of the areas that we felt people were lacking in. So 6 dimensions when it comes to knowledge. When you look at personality, there are 5 dimensions that we look at. Again, very specific to safety alone, which is, are you action-oriented? Are you quick, or are you careful? Sense of detail. You look at the whole detail and you sit with it, or are you also are you whole-oriented? Do you have a holistical view, or are you very detail-oriented? Excuse me. Stress management, how fast do you panic, or can you stay calm? Daring, that's another aspect. Then finally, the most important one is clout. Clout is how assertive are you? If any of the other 4 are strong, and if you have a high clout, it can be a negative impact or it can be a positive impact. So these are the 5 dimensions when it comes to personality. And finally, does anyone want to have a guess how many dimensions is there in logical reasoning? We had 6, we had 5, 4, okay. All right. No. It doesn't have any dimensions. It's just looking at how good you can think of what can go wrong or what circumstances you're in. It's what's called logical abilities, or what I call the light in the head. So these are the 3 key areas that we believe if you focus on by assessing people at the recruitment stage, you may be able to filter and find Mr. Careful. And with that, you can choose what to do. Filter doesn't mean that you've got to get rid of everyone else. There are many other examples we saw how you can help each other today in the industry. But we believe this is one little tool that you may be able to use to get the right person on board your assets. And with that, I would say thank you very much, and I hope you have not fallen asleep.